In the cold depths of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that echoes through every alien council chamber and military briefing room. Humans are unpredictable. Not because they're the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. No. What makes humans truly terrifying to other races is their inexplicable ability to look at something designed by evolution or engineering to kill them and somehow turn it into a companion. The Galactic Federation has documented thousands of species, catalogued their behaviors, predicted their responses to stimuli with mathematical precision. But humans? Humans see a creature with razor-sharp claws and think, pet. They encounter a beast that has evolved for millennia to be the perfect killing machine and wonder if it might be lonely. This is the story of Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist who did what every other species in the galaxy considered impossible, insane, or both. She looked into the eyes of the most feared predator in known space, a creature that had single-handedly wiped out 3 separate colonization attempts, and she didn't see a monster. She saw something else entirely. What happened next would reshape not just first contact protocols, but the very understanding of what it means to be human in a universe full of creatures who thought they knew everything about survival, dominance, and the natural order of things. They were all wrong. The shuttle scientific endeavor descended through the thick atmosphere of Kepler 442c like a silver needle threading through layers of amber clouds. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the viewport, watching the alien landscape unfold below. Rolling plains of crimson vegetation stretched toward jagged mountain ranges, while twin suns cast an orange glow across everything, making the world look like it was perpetually caught in sunset. "Still can't believe they're sending us down there," muttered Commander Jake Rodriguez from the pilot's seat. His knuckles were white against the controls. 3 colonies, Sarah, 3 separate attempts. Gone without a trace. Sarah adjusted her xenobiology scanner, checking the readings for the 100th time. "That's exactly why we need to go down there, Jake. The Federation needs to know what happened to those people. The planet's perfect for human habitation otherwise." "Perfect, except for whatever's eating the colonists," Rodriguez replied grimly. The shuttle touched down in a clearing that had once been the site of New Geneva, the second colony attempt. Sarah could see the remnants of prefabricated structures scattered across the area, their metal frames twisted and torn like paper. Claw marks scored the titanium plating, gouges too deep and too wide to have been made by any Earth predator. "Bioscanners picking up massive life signs about 2 clicks north," reported Dr. James Wu, the expedition's other scientist, a small man with nervous energy who specialized in alien ecosystems. "Whatever it is, it's big. Really big." Sarah gathered her equipment, including a portable habitat scanner, emergency beacon, and most importantly, her grandmother's old music box. It seemed silly to bring such a personal item on a dangerous mission, but her grandmother had always said, music could calm any savage beast. Sarah figured she might need all the help she could get. The team of 6 moved cautiously through the alien forest. The trees here were unlike anything in Earth's databases, with bark that shimmered like metal and leaves that seemed to track their movement. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow could hide death. They found the first body after an hour of searching, or rather, what remained of one. The colonist's environmental suit was shredded, and the body inside had been consumed. But not randomly. The creature, whatever it was, had been surgical in its feeding, taking only specific organs while leaving others untouched. "Intelligent predator," Sarah murmured, running her scanner over the remains. "It knows exactly what it wants and how to get it efficiently." "Great," Wu whispered. "Smart and deadly. My favorite combination." The second body told a similar story, and the third. But as they moved deeper into the forest, Sarah began noticing something odd. The attack patterns were inconsistent. Some victims had clearly tried to run and been hunted down. Others seemed to have been killed where they stood, with no signs of struggle or flight. "It's like they just gave up," she said, studying the scene around the 5th body. "No defensive wounds, no indication they tried to escape." "Fear paralysis," suggested Rodriguez. "Sometimes when people encounter something too terrifying to process, they just freeze." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She'd studied enough predator-prey relationships to know that even paralyzed prey usually showed some signs of the body's natural fight-or-flight response. These victims looked almost peaceful. The bioscanner began beeping frantically. Wu checked the display, and went pale. Contact. Big contact. Coming this way fast. The forest around them erupted in sound. Trees crashed. The ground shook with massive footsteps. And then they saw it. The creature was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. Standing nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, it moved through the forest with predatory grace despite its size. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color like a chameleon's, currently a deep amber that matched the forest shadows. 6 legs carried its serpentine body forward, while 4 arms, each ending in claws the size of sword blades, gestured as it moved. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the creature's obvious deadliness. It was its eyes, large, intelligent, and unmistakably sad. The rest of the team had their weapons drawn, though their hands shook. The creature could have killed them all in seconds if it wanted to. Instead, it stopped about 10 meters away and simply watched them.
"Nobody move," Rodriguez whispered. "Nobody even breathe hard."
But Sarah was already stepping forward, her hands raised peacefully.
"Easy," she said softly. Not to her team, but to the creature. "Easy there, beautiful." "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" Wu hissed. The creature tilted its massive head, studying her with obvious intelligence. Sarah could see now that its scales weren't just changing color for camouflage. They were shifting through a complex pattern of hues, almost like communication. "You're trying to talk to us," she realized aloud. "Aren't you?" The creature's color patterns intensified, cycling through what looked like increasingly urgent combinations. Sarah pulled out her scanner and began recording the patterns, looking for mathematical relationships or repetitive sequences. "Sarah, step back," Rodriguez ordered. "Now." "Wait," she said, not taking her eyes off the creature. "Look at the pattern. It's not random. There's a sequence here, a structure." The creature moved closer, lowering its massive head until it was just a few meters from Sarah. She could smell its breath, wild and alien but not unpleasant. Its eyes, she realized, weren't just sad, they were lonely. "You killed the colonists," she said softly, more statement than question. "But you didn't want to. You were trying to communicate with them, weren't you?" And when they couldn't understand, the creature's colors shifted to what could only be described as a mournful blue-gray. It made a sound, low and keening, that seemed to come from deep in its chest. "Predator-prey relationships aren't always about hunger," Sarah continued, her scientific mind racing. "Sometimes they're about territory. Sometimes they're about fear. And sometimes," she paused, a wild idea forming. "Sometimes they're about loneliness." "Dr. Chen?" Rodriguez said carefully. "I really think you should step back now." But Sarah was reaching into her pack, pulling out her grandmother's music box. The creature watched with obvious curiosity as she wound the small mechanism and opened the lid. The tinkling melody of Clair de Lune filled the alien forest. The effect on the creature was immediate and dramatic. Its massive body shuddered and its colors shifted to patterns Sarah had never seen, rippling waves of gold and silver and deep purple. The keening sound it made now was different, musical almost, as if it was trying to harmonize with the simple melody. "Impossible," Wu breathed. "It's responding to the music." The creature lowered itself to the ground, bringing its head down to Sarah's level. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched the smooth scales of its snout. They were warm and surprisingly soft, like leather that had been worn smooth by countless years. "You're not a mindless predator," she whispered. "You're intelligent, social, and you've been alone on this planet for who knows how long, trying to make contact with beings who couldn't understand that you were trying to communicate." The creature's colors shifted again, now displaying what Sarah was beginning to recognize as contentment. It made a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a cat's purr, but deeper, more resonant. "The colonists," Rodriguez said, understanding dawning in his voice. "When they couldn't communicate back, when they just showed fear, it probably thought they were rejecting its attempts at contact," Sarah finished. "Imagine being the only intelligent being on your planet, finally meeting others like you, only to have them run away screaming every time you tried to say hello." The music box played its simple melody again, and the creature harmonized with it, its voice creating haunting counterpoint to the familiar tune. Sarah found herself smiling despite the circumstances. "What now?" Wu asked. "We can't exactly bring it back to the ship." Sarah looked into the creature's intelligent eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "We don't take it anywhere. We stay here. We learn its language, teach it ours. We show the galaxy that not every first contact has to end in violence. The Federation will never approve extended contact with an uncontained alien predator," Rodriguez pointed out. Then we don't ask permission, Sarah said simply. We just do what's right. The creature seemed to sense the decision in her voice. Its colors shifted to bright, happy patterns, and it began what could only be described as a dance, moving its massive body in rhythm with the music box's melody. Other sounds emerged from deeper in the forest. Sarah realized with wonder that there were more of them. The creature wasn't alone after all. It was part of a community, and it was introducing them to its new friends. As the twin suns set behind the alien trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Sarah Chen sat beside a creature that could have killed her without effort, listening to it sing along with her grandmother's music box, and wondered why humans always seemed to be the only species in the galaxy who understood that intelligence and friendship could exist anywhere, in any form. The real challenge, she knew, would be convincing the rest of the galaxy that she was right. 3 weeks had passed since first contact, and the temporary camp established near the colony ruins had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Doctor. Sarah Chen watched through the morning mist as Harmony, the name she'd given to the first creature they'd encountered, carefully tended to a small garden of earth vegetables she'd helped plant. The sight never failed to amaze her. Here was a being that the Galactic Federation had classified as an extinction-class predator, delicately adjusting the soil around tomato seedlings with claws that could slice through titanium. The communication matrix is showing remarkable progress. Doctor. Wu called from his workstation, a complex array of computers and xenolinguistic equipment he'd assembled. The color pattern language has at least 3,000 distinct combinations we've catalogued so far, and that's just basic concepts. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet as she watched Harmony work. The creature had proven to be not just intelligent, but fascinatingly complex. Its species, which called themselves the HFY in their color language, had a social structure that put many so-called civilized species to shame. "Morning, beautiful," Sarah said as Harmony approached. The creature's scales immediately shifted to warm gold patterns that Sarah had learned meant happiness and greeting. Harmony rumbled a response, its colors cycling through a complex sequence. Sarah was getting better at reading the basic emotions and concepts, though the full language remained largely a mystery. She says good morning and asks if you slept well, translated Vera, the newest member of their expedition. Commander Rodriguez had called for a xenolinguist after Sarah's initial reports, and Vera Kozlov had volunteered immediately. The young Russian scientist had a gift for languages that bordered on the supernatural. "Tell her I slept fine, and thank her for the night song," Sarah replied. It had become a ritual. Each evening, the HFY community would gather in the forest clearing and sing together, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to resonate with the very molecules of the air. The humans had started joining in, humming along with melodies that spoke to something deep in their genetic memory. Vera's colors shifted through the appropriate patterns, and Harmony's response was immediate. Scales rippling with what Sarah had learned was amusement. The creature gently nudged Sarah with one of its smaller arms, then headed toward the forest, where the sounds of construction could be heard. "What's she building now?" Wu asked, looking up from his equipment. "Come and see," Sarah said, grinning. "You're not going to believe it." They followed Harmony into the forest, where an incredible scene was unfolding. Dozens of HFY were working together, using their natural abilities to shape the living forest itself. Trees were being guided to grow in specific patterns, their trunks and branches forming walls and arches. Vines were being woven into complex geometric patterns that somehow provided both beauty and structural support. "They're building houses," Wu breathed. "But not just any houses. They're growing them." Elder Keth, the oldest of the HFY and their unofficial leader, approached them with the slow dignity that marked his advanced age. His scales had long ago settled into a permanent pattern of deep blues and silvers, and his size dwarfed even Harmony. But when he looked at the humans, his colors always shifted to gentle patterns that conveyed welcome and protection. Through Vera, he explained what they were witnessing. The HFY were preparing permanent dwellings for their human guests, structures that would blend seamlessly with the forest ecosystem while providing all the comforts the humans might need.
"They want us to stay," Sarah realized.
"Permanently. The implications are staggering," Wu said, his scientific mind racing. "A truly symbiotic relationship between species. Humans providing technological knowledge and different perspectives, HFY offering their biotechnological mastery and connection to the ecosystem." But their peaceful morning was interrupted by the harsh beeping of the emergency communicator. Rodriguez, who had stayed back at the main camp to monitor their supplies and maintain contact with the Federation, was calling with obvious urgency. "Sarah, you need to get back here now." His voice crackled through the comm. "We've got company incoming, and it's not the friendly kind." They raced back to camp, where Rodriguez was frantically packing equipment. "Federation Task Force 7 just dropped out of hyperspace," he explained. 3 destroyers and a dreadnought. They're demanding immediate evacuation and full sterilization of the planet." "Sterilization?" Sarah felt her blood run cold. "They want to kill them all?" "Standard protocol for Class X predator species that have demonstrated hostility to human colonization," Rodriguez replied grimly. "I've bought us maybe 6 hours by claiming equipment failures are delaying our departure." Sarah looked back toward the forest, where she could see Harmony and several other Kethvar approaching. Their colors were shifting to patterns she'd learned meant worry and concern. They could sense the humans' distress, and it was affecting them deeply. "We have to stop this," she said. "They're not predators, they're people." "Try explaining that to Admiral Steele," Rodriguez said. "His old-school Federation thinks the only good alien predator is a dead alien predator." Vera was already at her translation equipment, rapidly communicating with Elder Keth. The ancient Kethvar's colors shifted through complex patterns that conveyed both understanding and determination. "He says they expected this," Vera translated. "They've encountered other species before, ones who couldn't see past their appearance and natural abilities. But he also says something else. He says the Kethvar have been waiting for humans specifically." "Waiting for us? How could they know about us?" Elder Keth's response sent chills through all of them. The Kethvar, it turned out, were far older than anyone had imagined. Their ancestors had achieved spaceflight millions of years ago, but had chosen to return to a simpler existence on their homeworld. They had been watching the galaxy's development for millennia, waiting for a species that showed the potential for true understanding. "They've been testing us," Sarah realized. "All those colonies, all those deaths. They weren't random attacks. The Kethvar were trying to find humans who could see past their appearance, who could recognize intelligence and the desire for communication. But the colonists died," Wu pointed out. Harmony approached, her colors cycling through remorseful patterns as Vera translated her explanation. The early colonists had responded with immediate violence, attacking the Kethvar emissaries who had come to establish contact. The Kethvar had defended themselves, but each death had filled them with sorrow. They had begun to think that humans, like so many other species, were incapable of seeing past surface appearances. Then Sarah had arrived, and everything had changed. The sound of atmospheric engines announced the arrival of the Federation shuttles. Through the forest canopy, Sarah could see military aircraft circling overhead, weapon systems clearly visible on their undersides. "Time's up," Rodriguez said. "We need to get to the extraction point." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We're not leaving, and we're not letting them destroy this world. Sarah, be reasonable. We can't fight the entire Federation Navy." "We don't have to fight them," she said, an idea forming in her mind. "We just have to show them what they're really destroying." Elder Keth had been listening to the exchange, and his colors shifted to patterns that Vera translated as deep understanding and approval. He communicated rapidly with the other Kethvar present, and Sarah watched in amazement as their responses rippled through the forest. Within minutes, the entire Kethvar community was mobilizing. "What are they doing?" Wu asked. Sarah watched as the Kethvar began to sing, their voices joining in a harmony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. But this wasn't their evening song. This was something else entirely. Something that reached into the deepest parts of human consciousness and spoke to memories older than civilization. "They're calling them home," she whispered. The Federation shuttles were landing in the clearing, disgorging heavily armed Marines in full combat gear. Admiral Steele himself stepped out of the lead craft, a tall, imposing man whose face had been carved by decades of making difficult decisions. "Dr.
Chen," he called out. "Step away from the alien creatures and report to the extraction zone immediately."
"Admiral," Sarah replied, walking slowly toward him with her hands visible but not raised.
There's something you need to understand about these beings. I understand that they've killed nearly 200 human colonists," Steele replied coldly. "That's all I need to know." "They're not predators," Sarah said. "They're artists, scientists, philosophers. They've been waiting millions of years for a species capable of true communication. Impossible. Our xenobiological profiles clearly identify them as apex predators with highly aggressive territorial behavior. That's when the music reached them. The HFY song had been growing stronger, and now it washed over the clearing like a tide of pure emotion. The Marines faltered, their weapons wavering as the ancient melody spoke to something primal in their human souls. Even Admiral Steele stopped speaking, his eyes widening as the full impact of the song hit him. Elder Keth emerged from the forest, his massive form moving with ceremonial dignity. Behind him came the entire HFY community, hundreds of beings moving in perfect harmony. Their scales were all shifting to the same pattern, the complex mandala of colors that spoke of welcome, peace, and infinite sadness for misunderstanding. The song reached a crescendo, and something unprecedented happened. The heavily armed Marines began to lower their weapons. Several of them were openly weeping. Admiral Steele himself had tears streaming down his face as the ancient melody touched something in his soul that he had thought long dead. "My God," he whispered. "What are they?" "They're what we could become," Sarah said softly, "if we're brave enough to try." Admiral Steele sat in uncomfortable silence aboard his flagship, the FNS Intrepid, staring at the data streams flowing across his command screens. 3 hours had passed since the incident on the planet's surface, and his entire worldview had been shattered by a song. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Hayes said carefully, "the Federation Council is demanding an immediate report on the sterilization operation." Steele didn't respond immediately. In his mind, he kept replaying those moments in the clearing when the alien song had reached into his soul and shown him something he'd never expected to find among the stars. Not conquest or dominance, but longing. Ancient, infinite longing for connection. "Sir?" Hayes pressed. "Tell the Council that the situation has become complicated," Steele said finally. "Request a diplomatic envoy with full xenocultural specialists." "Sir, with respect, our orders were clear. These creatures represent a Class X threat to human expansion." Steele turned to face his subordinate, and Hayes was startled to see something in the Admiral's eyes he'd never seen before. Doubt. After 30 years of military service, making impossible decisions and living with their consequences, Admiral Steele was questioning everything he thought he knew about alien contact. "Lieutenant Commander, have you ever heard a sound that changed your understanding of reality?" Hayes looked confused. "Sir?" "Neither had I," Steele said quietly. "Until today." Down on the planet's surface, Sarah Chen was facing her own crisis of understanding. She sat in the newly constructed bio-dwelling the HFY had grown for her. A living structure that breathed with the rhythms of the forest and provided everything she needed while disturbing nothing in the ecosystem. Harmony lay curled nearby, her massive form somehow managing to look both dangerous and peaceful. Her scales were cycling through what Sarah had learned were dream patterns, colors that shifted with her subconscious thoughts while she slept. "Can't sleep either?" Dr. Wu asked, emerging from his own dwelling nearby. "Too much to process," Sarah admitted. "Do you realize what we've stumbled into here? This isn't just first contact. This is contact with a species that's been observing galactic civilization for millions of years, waiting for someone capable of true communication." Wu settled down beside her, gazing up at the alien stars visible through the forest canopy. "The implications are staggering. If the HFY have been watching us, if they've seen other species rise and fall, they might have knowledge that could change everything." "That's not what scares me," Sarah said. "What scares me is that we almost destroyed them without ever knowing what we were losing." Vera approached, her translation equipment slung over her shoulder. The linguist had been working non-stop to decode more of the HFY color language, and she looked exhausted but excited. "I've made a breakthrough," she announced. "The historical patterns in their language. I've been able to decode some of the stories Elder Keith has been sharing." She activated a holographic display that showed complex color patterns shifting through mathematical relationships. "This is the story of the first silence," she explained. Roughly translated, it tells of the first time the HFY encountered another intelligent species. The patterns on the display were hauntingly beautiful, but Sarah could sense an underlying sadness in their structure. "What happened?" "The other species saw only predators," Vera said. "They attacked immediately, using weapons that could destroy entire continents. The HFY defended themselves, but..." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "They had to watch an entire civilization destroy itself rather than accept that intelligence could take forms they didn't expect." Wu leaned forward. "How many times has this happened?" 17, Vera said quietly. 17 different species over millions of years. The Kethvar have watched 17 civilizations choose mutual destruction over understanding. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien night air. And humans were supposed to be number 18. But we weren't, Wu pointed out. You found a way to communicate. You saw past their appearance. One human out of hundreds, Sarah replied. If the circumstances had been different, if someone else had been leading that expedition, we might have ended up like all the others. Harmony stirred in her sleep, her colors shifting to more disturbed patterns. Sarah reached out instinctively to stroke the creature's scales, and immediately the patterns calmed. Even in sleep, the Kethvar were sensitive to the emotions of those around them. That's something else I've discovered, Vera said, watching the interaction. They're empathic. Not telepathic exactly, but they can sense and respond to emotional states. It's part of how they communicate so effectively through color patterns. They're literally sharing emotional information, which explains why the violence from previous encounters affected them so deeply, Wu realized. They weren't just being attacked physically. They were feeling the fear and hatred of their attackers. Sarah's communicator chimed with an incoming message from the Federation flagship. She read it quickly, then looked up at her colleagues with a mixture of hope and concern. Admiral Steele wants to meet with Elder Keith, face-to-face on neutral ground. That's unexpected, Wu said. Yesterday he was preparing to sterilize the planet. The song changed him, Sarah said. I saw it in his eyes. Whatever the Kethvar's music did to him, it opened something he'd closed off long ago. They found Elder Keth in the community's central grove, surrounded by dozens of other Kethvar, in what appeared to be a council session. The colors shifting across their scales were complex beyond Sarah's ability to fully interpret, but she could sense the gravity of their discussion. They're debating whether to trust us, Vera translated. Some of them think humans are just another species that will eventually choose violence over understanding. Elder Keth noticed their approach and shifted his colors to a welcoming pattern. Through Vera, he explained that the Kethvar had been observing the Federation fleet, and they understood the danger they faced. But, Vera translated, he says they've also been observing Admiral Steele specifically. They're curious about the changes they're sensing in him. Changes? Sarah asked. Elder Keth's explanation was lengthy and complex, but the essence was clear. The Kethvar could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the Admiral's emotional patterns after hearing their song. Where before there had been rigid certainty and suppressed compassion, now there was uncertainty, curiosity, and something that might be hope. He's willing to meet with the Admiral, Vera said finally, but he wants to bring something to the meeting. A gift. What kind of gift? Elder Keth moved toward a section of the grove that Sarah had never seen before. An area where the trees grew in impossible spirals and the very air seemed to shimmer with energy. The ancient Kethvar approached one particular tree, its trunk covered in crystalline growths that pulsed within a light. With careful precision, Elder Keth used one of his smaller claws to extract a crystal about the size of a human hand. The moment it was separated from the tree, it began to glow more brightly, and Sarah could swear she heard faint music emanating from its core.
Memory crystal, Vera breathed, translating Elder Keth's explanation.
It contains the complete history of the Kethvar's interactions with other species. Everything they've learned about intelligence, communication, and the barriers that prevent understanding between different forms of life. Sarah realized the magnitude of what was being offered. This is worth more than any technology, any resource. This is millions of years of accumulated wisdom about interspecies contact. And he's willing to give it to Admiral Steele? Elder Keith's colors shifted through patterns that conveyed both hope and resignation. Through Vera, he explained that this was the 18th time the Kethvar had made such an offer. 17 times before the gift had been refused or ignored. But something about the humans gave him hope that this time might be different. The meeting was arranged for the following morning. In the clearing where the first successful communication had taken place, Admiral Steele arrived with a minimal escort, having left most of his Marines aboard the ships. Sarah could see the tension in his posture, but also something else. The rigid military bearing that had defined him for decades had softened slightly, as if the music had loosened something that had been wound too tight for too long. Elder Keth approached slowly, the memory crystal held carefully in one of his primary arms. His scales were displaying patterns that Vera quietly translated as formal greeting, respect for a worthy opponent, and cautious hope. Admiral, the ancient being said through Vera's translation, I bring you a gift that has been refused 17 times before. The complete history of intelligence in this galaxy, and the tragedy of species that could not see past their differences. Steele stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing crystal. Why offer this to us? What makes you think humans will be any different from the others? Elder Keth's response was simple but profound. Because one of you heard our song and wept. Because another sat with us and shared music. Because when faced with creatures that could destroy you, you chose to try understanding instead of shooting first. The Admiral reached out slowly and accepted the crystal. The moment it touched his hands, his eyes widened and he gasped audibly. Sarah realized that the crystal wasn't just a repository of information, it was a direct emotional link to millions of years of Kethvar experience. My God, Steele whispered, tears streaming down his face again. All those civilizations, all that potential, lost to fear and misunderstanding. Now you understand why we sing, Elder Keth said through Vera. We sing for all the voices that have been silenced, all the connections that could have been made. We sing because without hope, the universe becomes nothing but empty space between dying stars. Admiral Steele stood in the alien clearing, holding a crystal that contained the memories of 17 extinct civilizations, and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Dr. Chen, he said, his voice steady despite the tears on his face, I'm recommending that this planet be declared a protected diplomatic zone. And I'm requesting that you serve as humanity's first permanent ambassador to the Kethvar people. Sarah looked at Harmony, who had approached during the ceremony and was now displaying colors that could only be described as joy mixed with relief. She thought about her comfortable life on Earth, her research position at the university, all the familiar things she would be leaving behind. Then she looked into the intelligent, hopeful eyes of beings who had waited millions of years for someone to understand that friendship could exist anywhere, in any form. I accept, she said simply. 6 months after first contact, the Federation Council chambers on New Geneva buzzed with unprecedented tension. Representatives from 47 different species filled the amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of sounds, lights, and chemical signals that the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of it all stood Sarah Chen, no longer the simple xenobiologist who had descended to Kepler 442c with scientific curiosity. Her hair had grown longer during her time with the Kethvar, and she wore a pendant made from living crystal that pulsed gently with her heartbeat, a gift from Elder Keth that allowed her to sense the emotional undertones of those around her. The proposal before us today, announced Chancellor Vex, the 3-meter-tall insectoid leader of the Zephyrian Collective, challenges the very foundations of how we approach species classification and first contact protocols. Sarah felt the weight of countless alien gazes upon her. Through her crystal pendant, she could sense the mixture of emotions in the chamber. Fear from some species, curiosity from others, and from a few, something that might have been hope. Honored representatives, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 6 months ago, we thought we were dealing with a simple predator species that had killed human colonists. Today, I stand before you as the ambassador to a civilization that has been watching over galactic development for longer than any of our species have existed. The Corvin delegate, a silicon-based life form whose communication consisted of harmonic resonance, sent a skeptical pulse through the chamber. The translator interpreted, "Claims without evidence. Show us proof of this alleged ancient civilization." Sarah smiled and activated the holographic projector beside her. The chamber filled with the 3-dimensional representation of a vast crystalline structure that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that hurt to look at directly. This is the archive, Sarah explained. The complete repository of Kethvar knowledge spanning 17 million years of observation and contact with other species. They've been documenting the rise and fall of galactic civilization since before the first of our worlds developed complex life. The hologram shifted, showing star charts that mapped the locations of hundreds of extinct civilizations. Each marker pulsed with a different color, representing the manner of their extinction. The vast majority pulsed red, indicating self-destruction following failed first contact with the Kethvar. The pattern is consistent, Sarah continued. Species encounter the Kethvar, perceive them as threats due to their physical capabilities, and choose to fight rather than attempt communication. The Kethvar defend themselves, but the psychological trauma of repeated violence eventually leads to societal collapse. Ambassador Thrain of the warrior caste of Altair stood abruptly, his 4 arms gesturing in the traditional Altarian challenge pose. If these creatures are so powerful, why do they not simply conquer? Why this elaborate deception of peaceful intent? The question hung in the air, and Sarah felt the shift in the chamber's emotional climate through her pendant. This was the crucial moment. Everything depended on whether she could make them understand what she had learned during her months with the HFY. Because, Sarah said quietly, they understand something that most of our species haven't learned yet. True strength isn't about the ability to destroy. It's about the ability to create, to connect, to find harmony and diversity. She gestured, and the hologram changed again, showing the current state of Kepler 442c. The Human Research Station had grown into something unprecedented, a fusion of human technology and HFY biotechnology that existed in perfect harmony with the planet's ecosystem. Gardens floated in the air, supported by gravitic fields generated by living organisms. Buildings grew from the ground like trees, their walls breathing and self-repairing. In 6 months, Sarah said, we've achieved technological advances that should have taken decades, not through conquest or exploitation, but through cooperation and mutual exchange of knowledge. The Crystalline Collective's representative, a being of pure silicon and light, pulsed with interest. Show us these advances. Sarah activated her personal communicator, and a moment later Harmony's voice filled the chamber. The HFY had learned to modulate their natural harmonics to approximate human speech, though the effect was hauntingly beautiful rather than purely functional. Greetings, honored representatives of the galactic community, Harmony said, her words carrying undertones of music that made several delegates visibly emotional. I speak to you from what humans call Kepler 442c, but which we have always known as Kethanar, the singing world. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter at the realization that they were speaking directly with one of the supposed predators. Sarah raised her hand for silence. Sarah, friend, has told us of your concerns, Harmony continued. You fear that we are dangerous, that our size and capabilities make us threats to your civilizations. But I ask you to consider this. In 17 million years, how many unprovoked attacks have the HFY made on peaceful vessels or colonies? The question was rhetorical, but several delegates could be seen consulting their databases. The answer, Sarah knew, was 0. Every incident involving HFY had been either defensive in nature or the result of misunderstood attempts at communication. We have weapons that could shatter worlds, Harmony said, her voice growing more musical as emotion colored her words. We have biotechnology that could terraform entire star systems. We have knowledge that could advance any civilization by millennia. But we do not use these things for conquest because we have learned the most important lesson in the universe. She paused, letting the chamber fall silent before delivering the crucial truth. A universe where intelligence destroys intelligence is a universe dying of loneliness. The impact of those words was immediate and profound. Sarah felt it through her pendant as waves of emotion swept through the chamber. The empathic consortium of Tau Ceti began to harmonize unconsciously, their natural response to deep emotional truth. Even the usually stoic Machine Collective's representative displayed status lights that indicated heightened processing. The HFY proposal is simple, Sarah continued, seizing the moment. Complete revision of first contact protocols to prioritize communication over classification. Establishment of mixed species research stations to facilitate cultural and technological exchange. And most importantly, recognition that intelligence can take forms we never imagined, and that our first instinct should be curiosity, not fear. Chancellor Vex's mandibles clicked in the Zephyrian expression of deep thought. The implications of such changes would be vast. Many species have built their entire defense strategies around the assumption that unknown equals dangerous. And look where that's gotten us, said a new voice from the chamber's entrance. All eyes turned to see Admiral Steele entering, flanked by a delegation of human military leaders. But these weren't the rigid, suspicious officers that most of the chamber expected. They moved with the confident ease of people who had found something they didn't know they were searching for. Honored representatives, Steele said, taking a position beside Sarah. I speak as someone who spent 30 years believing that the best defense was overwhelming offense. 6 months ago, I was prepared to sterilize an entire world based on incomplete information and fear. He activated his own holographic display, showing the current state of human HFY military cooperation. Today, I command a joint task force that has revolutionized our understanding of both warfare and peacekeeping. HFY bioships can heal themselves and their crews. Their defensive systems can neutralize incoming weapons without harming the attackers. They've shown us how to fight wars without creating enemies. The warrior caste delegate was visibly skeptical. Pretty words, but what of species that cannot be reasoned with? The hive storms of the Outer Rim? The berserker cults of the Dark Nebula? Harmony's voice carried a note of sadness as she responded. We have dealt with such species before. But we have learned that even the most aggressive beings usually fight from fear or desperation. Remove the source of their fear, offer alternatives to desperation, and even berserkers can become gardeners. Prove it, the warrior caste delegate challenged. Sarah exchanged a glance with Admiral Steele, then activated her emergency communicator. Elder Keth, we need the Give-Arc records. The hologram shimmered and changed, showing a star system that many in the chamber recognized. The Give-Arc system had been the site of one of the most vicious wars in galactic history, where an insectoid hive mind species had fought a century-long campaign against any species that approached their territory. The Gurvek, Sarah explained, were considered irredeemably hostile. 15 separate species tried to establish contact over 3,000 years. All attempts ended in violence. The Kethvar made contact 4,000 years ago. The hologram showed the current state of the Gurvak system. What had once been a fortress of hostile hive ships was now a thriving multi-species research station. The insectoid Gurvak worked alongside dozens of other species in what appeared to be perfect harmony. How? Whispered the empathic consortium representative. The Kethvar discovered that the Gurvak aggression was rooted in a genetic memory of their homeworld's destruction by a plague, Sarah explained. They were attacking anything they perceived as a potential source of contamination. The Kethvar helped them heal their world and showed them how to detect and neutralize biological threats without violence. The solution was so simple, Harmony added, that we almost missed it ourselves. They weren't monsters. They were trauma survivors, protecting themselves the only way they knew how. The chamber fell into thoughtful silence. Sarah could feel the shift in emotional climate through her pendant. Fear was being replaced by cautious hope, suspicion by curiosity. Finally, Chancellor Vex spoke. If we accept this proposal, if we fundamentally change how we approach unknown species, what guarantees do we have? How do we know that the next species we encounter with patience and understanding won't simply exploit our openness? Sarah looked around the chamber, at the dozens of different species that had somehow managed to coexist despite their differences. The same guarantee we've always had, she said simply. None. But we've been operating on fear for thousands of years, and look where it's gotten us. Endless wars, extinct civilizations, a galaxy where first contact is synonymous with violence. She activated one final holographic display, showing the current growth of interspecies cooperation since the Kethvar revelation. Trade routes that had been closed for centuries were reopening. Research partnerships were forming between species that had never trusted each other. Even the crime rates and border systems were dropping as resources once devoted to military buildup were redirected toward education and cultural exchange. The Kethvar way isn't just about being nice to predators, Sarah concluded. It's about recognizing that intelligence, regardless of its form, is the rarest and most precious thing in the universe. And maybe, just maybe, if we stop trying to destroy each other long enough to actually listen, we might learn something that makes all our lives better. The vote, when it came, was closer than Sarah had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. 26 species voted in favor of the new protocols, 15 opposed, and 6 abstained. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. As the chamber began to empty, delegates clustering in small groups to discuss the implications of the historic vote, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Admiral Steele, his weathered face showing an expression she'd never seen before. Peace. Think it'll work? He asked. Sarah looked at her pendant, feeling the lingering emotions of hope and possibility that still resonated through the chamber. Ask me in a few thousand years, she said with a smile. But, for the first time since I've been studying alien species, I'm optimistic about what we might find out there. As if in response to her words, Harmony's voice came through the communicator one last time, now speaking directly to the remaining delegates. Thank you, the Kethvar said simply. For the first time in 17 million years, we are not the only species in the galaxy that believes intelligence is worth preserving. The vote had been about protocols and policies, but Sarah realized it represented something much more profound. For the first time in galactic history, the dominant response to the unknown would be curiosity rather than fear. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of revolution that could only have been started by humans who looked at a perfect killing machine and decided it needed a friend. 5 years after the historic vote in the Federation Council, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the research station that had grown from the ruins of New Geneva. But calling it a research station hardly did justice to what it had become. The structure stretched for kilometers in every direction, a living fusion of technology and biology that pulsed with the rhythms of 100 different species working in harmony. Through the transparent biomembrane that served as the deck's viewing surface, she could see Harmony tending to the newest addition to their community. The Nexari had arrived 3 months ago, silicon-based beings from the Galactic Rim whose crystalline forms had initially triggered every predator alert system in the Federation database. They stood 4 meters tall, their bodies composed of living crystal that could reshape itself at will, with appendages that could function as either delicate manipulator tools or devastating weapons. The old protocols would have classified them as a Class X threat and ordered immediate containment or elimination. Under the new guidelines, they had been welcomed as the unique individuals they were. As Sarah watched, Harmony's massive form moved gracefully around the Nexari delegation, her scales shifting through complex patterns that had taken months to translate. The Nexari responded with their own communication method, altering the frequency and intensity of their crystalline resonance to create music that seemed to make the very air sparkle. "Still can't believe we almost missed this," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Admiral Steele, though he wore civilian clothes now, and carried the title of Director of Interspecies Relations. His transformation over the past 5 years had been as dramatic as any of the aliens they'd encountered. The rigid military officer had become something Sarah had never expected to see, a diplomat with the soul of a poet. "The Nexari?" Sarah asked. "Or the whole program?" "All of it," Steele replied, moving to stand beside her at the viewing wall. "Do you ever wonder what the galaxy would look like if we'd started this approach 1,000 years ago? 10,000? It was a question Sarah had pondered many times. The changes over the past 5 years had been profound and far-reaching. Trade routes that had been closed for millennia were now bustling with multi-species commerce. Scientific advances that should have taken centuries were happening in years through cooperative research. Even the political landscape had shifted, with former enemies finding common ground in their shared curiosity about the universe. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The species that had once been known for their aggressive expansion and territorial nature had become the galaxy's foremost advocates for peaceful first contact. Human diplomatic teams were now requested specifically for encounters with unknown species, their reputation for finding common ground preceding them across the stars. "Dr. Chen, to the communication center, please. Priority Alpha contact." Sarah's communicator chimed with the automated announcement that meant only one thing. Someone had made contact with a previously unknown species. B's call still sent a thrill of excitement and nervousness through her, even after dozens of successful first contacts. She found the communication center buzzing with activity. Dr. Wu, now the station's director of xenolinguistics, was coordinating with translation teams from 6 different species. Vera Kozlov had been joined by specialists in quantum consciousness communication, empathic resonance mapping, and mathematical universal constant expressions. "What do we have?" Sarah asked. "This is unlike anything we've encountered before," Wu replied, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Long-range sensors picked up artificial structures in the void sector, the region beyond the galactic rim that we've always assumed was empty space." Sarah felt a chill. The void sector was exactly what its name implied, a region of space so empty and cold that nothing should have been able to survive there, much less build permanent structures. "How big are the structures?" she asked. "Planet-sized," Wu said quietly. "And they appear to be moving in formation toward the galactic core." The implications were staggering. Any species capable of building planet-sized structures and moving them across intergalactic distances would possess technology that made even Kethvar capabilities look primitive. "Have they attempted communication?" "That's the strange part," Vera chimed in from her workstation. "They've been broadcasting continuously on multiple frequencies, but the message isn't what we expected." She activated the main display, showing the complex waveforms the mysterious structures had been transmitting. "It's not a greeting, or a warning, or a demand. As far as we can tell, it's music." Sarah studied the patterns, her experience with Kethvar color language, helping her recognize the mathematical relationships underlying the seemingly chaotic signals. "It's not random music," she realized. "There's a structure here, a progression. They're telling a story." Elder Keth's voice suddenly filled the communication center, his harmonics conveying urgent concern. "Sarah, friend, we must speak immediately. The songs from the void touch memories we had thought lost forever." Within minutes, Elder Keith had arrived at the communication center, accompanied by several other ancient Kethvar, whose scales were displaying patterns Sarah had never seen before. Colors shifted through their hide in combinations that seemed to bypass the conscious mind and speak directly to primal memory. "You know what these beings are," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "We know what they were," Elder Keth replied, his massive form somehow managing to convey both awe and trepidation. In the deepest archives, in stories so old they predate our written history, there are legends of the gardeners. The name sent ripples of recognition through the assembled xenolinguists and cultural specialists. Every species in the galaxy had legends of beings who had seeded life throughout the cosmos, ancient myths of gardeners who had planted the seeds that eventually grew into galactic civilization. Legend says they departed the galaxy eons ago, Elder Keth continued, when the young species they had nurtured began to reach toward the stars. They promised to return when the garden was ready for their guidance again. Sarah felt pieces clicking together in her mind. Ready for guidance. Not conquest, not correction, but guidance.
They've been watching us develop, waiting for us to prove we could work together instead of destroying each other. And our success with interspecies cooperation, Steele added, understanding dawning in his voice, was the sign they were waiting for.
The communication board suddenly erupted with incoming signals.
The planet-sized structures had increased their transmission power dramatically, and now their signals were being received clearly across the entire galaxy. Vera worked frantically to process the new data, her equipment struggling to handle the sheer volume of information. It's not just music anymore, she announced. There are mathematical proofs, scientific formulas, artistic compositions, philosophical treatises. It's like they're transmitting the sum total of their civilization's knowledge. A gift, Sarah breathed. They're not coming as conquerors or judges. They're coming as teachers, offering to share everything they've learned in their eons of existence. But even as the realization filled her with wonder, Sarah felt a gnawing concern. The galaxy had made tremendous progress in the past 5 years, but they were still far from the unified civilization these gardeners might expect to find. There were still species that preferred isolation, still conflicts that erupted over resources or territorial disputes, still those who viewed the new cooperation protocols with suspicion. How long before they reached the inhabited systems? She asked. Wu consulted his calculations. At their current velocity, approximately 6 months. But Sarah... He paused, looking troubled. They're not heading for any of the major populated systems. Their course takes them directly to this station. The implication was clear. Somehow, the gardeners knew about their small research station, about the unique cooperation between humans and Kethvar that had sparked the galactic renaissance of interspecies relations. They were coming here specifically, to this place where the impossible had been made possible by beings who had chosen understanding over fear. We need to prepare, Sarah said, her mind racing through the implications. Not defensively, but culturally. If these beings have been watching our development, they'll expect to see the best examples of what we've accomplished. More than that, Elder Keith added, his colors shifting to patterns that convey deep understanding, they will test us, not with weapons or challenges, but with opportunities. They will see if our cooperation is genuine or merely expedient. The next 6 months passed in a flurry of preparation. Representatives from every species in the Federation arrived at the station, not as political delegates but as examples of their culture's greatest achievements. Artists, scientists, philosophers, and storytellers gathered in unprecedented numbers, creating an interstellar festival of intelligence and creativity that transformed the station into something resembling a living artwork. Harmony had grown even larger during this time, her natural Kethvar aging process accelerated by the emotional intensity of constant interspecies contact. But rather than withdraw, she had become the unofficial coordinator of the cultural preparations, her empathic abilities allowing her to sense and resolve conflicts before they could disrupt the delicate harmony they were building. When the day finally arrived, Sarah stood again on the observation deck, but now she was surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, all watching the sky with a mixture of anticipation and awe. The gardener ship appeared not as a technological construct, but as something that seemed to exist at the intersection of art and engineering. It was beautiful beyond description, its surface flowing like liquid starlight while maintaining the structural integrity needed for interstellar travel. As it approached the station, it began to sing. The song was unlike anything the galaxy had ever heard. It contained harmonies that touched the deepest memories of every species present, melodies that spoke to universal experiences of growth, discovery, and the wonder of consciousness emerging from chaos. Even the most analytically minded scientists found themselves moved to tears by the sheer beauty of it. Greetings, children of the galaxy. came a voice that seemed to speak directly to each being in their own native communication method. "We are the ones your legends call gardeners, though we prefer to think of ourselves as fellow students in the University of Existence." The gardener who materialized on the observation deck was not the imposing figure of ancient myth. Instead, it appeared as a being of shifting, impossible beauty, its form adapting moment by moment to be comprehensible to each observer while remaining fundamentally itself.
"We have watched your progress with great interest," the gardener continued.
5 years ago, you stood at a crossroads. You could have chosen the path of fear, as so many species before you. Instead, you chose the more difficult road of understanding. Sarah stepped forward, feeling the weight of representing not just humanity, but the entire cooperative effort that had brought them to this moment. "We're still learning," she said honestly. "We make mistakes, we have conflicts, we don't always live up to our own ideals. Which is exactly why we have come," the gardener replied, its form shifting to display what might have been a smile. "Perfection is not the goal of existence. Growth is. Exploration is. The courage to reach beyond your limitations and discover what you might become." The gardener gestured, and the space around them filled with holographic displays showing the current state of galactic civilization. Trade routes pulsed with activity, research stations bloomed like flowers throughout the spiral arms, and in dozens of systems, species that had never trusted each other were working together on projects that benefited all. You have proven that intelligence, regardless of its form, can choose cooperation over competition, understanding over fear. But this is only the beginning. The displays changed, showing vistas beyond the galaxy itself. Distant star clusters where other civilizations faced their own crossroads, cosmic phenomena that defied current understanding, and challenges that would require the combined efforts of every intelligent species in the galaxy to even attempt. We offer not to lead you, but to walk beside you as you take your next steps into the larger universe. There are wonders beyond imagining waiting to be discovered, but they can only be found by beings who have learned that their greatest strength lies not in what they can destroy, but in what they can build together. Sarah looked around the observation deck at the dozens of species represented there. Harmony's massive presence, her scales cycling through patterns of joy and anticipation. The crystalline Nexari, their forms resonating with harmonics that spoke of deep contentment. Even Admiral Steele, the former warrior who had learned that the greatest victories came not from defeating enemies but from turning them into friends. "We accept," she said, speaking not just for humanity but for the unprecedented alliance they had all built together. "Not because we're ready, but because we're willing to learn." The gardener's form shifted again, and Sarah could swear she saw approval in its impossible features. "Then let us begin. The next chapter of galactic civilization starts now, and it will be written by all of us together." As the gardener ship settled into orbit around the station, beginning the process of establishing permanent cultural and scientific exchange, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion mixed with anticipation. The journey that had begun with her grandmother's music box playing Clair de Lune to a lonely predator in an alien forest had led to this moment, when the galaxy itself had learned to sing in harmony. Harmony approached, her massive head lowering to Sarah's level, in the gesture of affection they had developed over the years of friendship. Her scales displayed patterns that needed no translation, colors that spoke of gratitude, love, and the joy of discovering that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than either of their species had dared to imagine. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, the question directed as much to herself as to her alien friend. Harmony's response came not in color patterns, but in the musical speech she had developed, words that carried harmonies of infinite possibility. "Now," she said, "we see what happens when the children of the galaxy grow up and discover they were never alone." Outside the station, the gardener ship began to sing again, its melody joined by the voices of every species present. The song that emerged was chaotic, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. It was the sound of intelligence celebrating itself, of consciousness reaching out across the void and finding not enemies but friends. It was, Sarah realized, the sound of the galaxy coming home. And somewhere in that cosmic harmony, she could still hear the simple melody of Clair de Lune, the tune that had started it all by proving that music truly could calm any savage beast, even the beast of fear that lived in the hearts of civilizations themselves.